The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose in the mountains of mist. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning. Born below the ever cloud-capped peaks that gave the mountains their name, the wind blew east, out across the sand hills, once the shore of a great ocean, before the breaking of the world. Down it flailed into the two rivers, into the tangled forest called the Westwood, and beat at two men walking with a cart and horse down the rock-strewn track called the quarry road. For all that spring should have come a good month since, the wind carried an icy chill, as if it would rather bear snow. Gusts plastered Rand al'Thor's cloak to his back, whipped the earth-colored wool around his legs, then streamed it out behind him. He wished his coat were heavier, or that he had worn an extra shirt. Half the time when he tried to tug the cloak back around him, it caught on the quiver swinging at his hip. Trying to hold the cloak one-handed did not do much good anyway. He had his bow in the other, an arrow nocked and ready to draw. As a particularly strong blast tugged the cloak out of his hand, he glanced at his father over the back of the shaggy brown mare. He felt a little foolish about wanting to reassure himself that Tam was still there. But it was that kind of day. The wind howled when it rose, but aside from that, quiet lay heavy on the land. The soft creak of the axle sounded loud by comparison. No birds sang in the forest. No squirrels chittered from a branch. Not that he expected them, really. Not this spring. Only trees that kept leaf or needle through the winter had any green about them. Snarls of last year's bramble spread brown webs over stone outcrops under the trees. Nettles numbered most among the few weeds. The rest were the sorts with sharp burrs or thorns, or stickweed, which left a rank smell on the unwary boot that crushed it. Scattered white patches of snow still dotted the ground, where tight clumps of trees kept deep shade. Where sunlight did reach, it held neither strength nor warmth. The pale sun sat above the trees to the east, but its light was crisply dark, as if mixed with shadow. It was an awkward morning, made for unpleasant thoughts. Without thinking, he touched the nock of the arrow. It was ready to draw to his cheek in one smooth movement, the way Tam had taught him. Winter had been bad enough on the farms, worse than even the oldest folk remembered, but it must have been harsher still in the mountains, if the number of wolves driven down into the two rivers was any guide. Wolves raided the sheep pens and chewed their way into barns to get the cattle and horses. Bears had been after the sheep too, where a bear had not been seen in years. It was no longer safe to be out after dark. Men were the prey as often as sheep, and the sun did not always have to be down. Tam was taking steady strides on the other side of Bella, using his spear as a walking staff, ignoring the wind that made his brown cloak flap like a banner. Now and again he touched the mare's flank tightly to remind her to keep moving. With his thick chest and broad face, he was a pillar of reality in that morning, like a stone in the middle of a drifting dream. His sun-roughened cheeks might be lined and his hair have only a sprinkling of black among the gray. But there was a solidness to him, as though a flood could wash around him without uprooting his feet. He stumped down the road now impassively. Wolves and bears were all very well, his manner said. Things that any man who kept sheep must be aware of. But they had best not try to stop Tam, Althor, getting to Edmondsfield. With a guilty start, Rand returned to watching his side of the road, Tam's matter-of-factness reminding him on his task. He was a head taller than his father, taller than anyone else in the district, and had little of Tam in him physically, except perhaps for breadth of shoulder. Gray eyes and the reddest tinge to his hair came from his mother, so Tam said. She had been an outlander, and Rand remembered little of her, aside from a smiling face, though he did put flowers on her grave every year, at Beltane in the spring and at Sunday in the summer. 2 small casks of Tam's apple brandy rested in the lurching cart, and 8 larger barrels of apple cider, only slightly hard after a winter's curing. Tam delivered the same every year to the Wine Spring Inn for use during Beltane, and he had declared that it would take more than wolves or a cold wind to stop him this spring. Even so, they had not been to the village for weeks. Not even Tam traveled much these days. But Tam had given his word about the brandy and cider, even if he had waited to make delivery until the day before festival. Keeping his word was important to Tam. Rand was just glad to get away from the farm, almost as glad as about the coming of Beltane. As Rand watched his side of the road, the feeling grew in him that he was being watched. For a while he tried to shrug it off. Nothing moved or made a sound among the trees except the wind. But the feeling not only persisted, it grew stronger. The hairs on his arms stirred. His skin prickled as if it itched on the inside. He shifted his bow irritably to rub his arms, and he told himself to stop letting fancies take him. There was nothing in the woods on his side of the road, and Tam would have spoken if there had been anything on the other. He glanced over his shoulder and blinked. Not more than 20 spans back down the road, a cloaked figure on horseback followed them. Horse and rider alike black, dull, and ungleaming. It was more habit than anything else that kept him walking backward alongside the cart even while he looked. The rider's cloak covered him to his boot tops. The cowl tugged well forward, so no part of him showed. Vaguely, Rand thought there was something odd about the horseman, but it was the shadowed opening of the hood that fascinated him. He could see only the vaguest outlines of a face, but he had the feeling he was looking right into the rider's eyes, and he could not look away. Queasiness settled in his stomach. There was only shadow to see in the hood, but he felt hatred as sharply as if he could see a snarling face. Hatred for everything that lived. Hatred for him most of all. For him above all things. Abruptly, a stone caught his heel and he stumbled, breaking his eyes away from the dark horseman. His bow dropped to the road, and only an outthrust hand grabbing Bella's harness saved him from falling flat on his back. With a startled snort, the mare stopped, twisting her head to see what had caught her. Tam frowned over Bella's back at him. "Are you all right, lad?" "A rider," Rand said breathlessly, pulling himself upright. "A stranger following us." "Where?" The elder man lifted his broad-bladed spear and peered back warily. "There, down the—" Rand's words trailed off as he turned to point. The road behind was empty. Disbelieving, he stared into the forest on both sides of the road. Bare branched trees offered no hiding place, but there was not a glimmer of horse or horseman. He met his father's questioning gaze. He was there, a man in a black cloak, on a black horse. "I wouldn't doubt your word, lad. But where has he gone?" "I don't know, but he was there." He snatched up the fallen bow and arrow, hastily checked the fletching before re-knocking, and half drew before letting the bowstring relax. There was nothing to aim at. He was. Tam shook his grizzled head. "If you say so, lad." "Come on, then." A horse leaves hoof prints, even on this ground. He started toward the rear of the cart, his cloak whipping in the wind. If we find them, we'll know for a fact he was there. If not, well, these are days to make a man think he's seeing things. Abruptly, Rand realized what had been odd about the horseman, aside from his being there at all. The wind that beat at Tam and him had not so much as shifted a fold of that black cloak. His mouth was suddenly dry. He must have imagined it. His father was right. This was a morning to prickle a man's imagination. But he did not believe it. Only, how did he tell his father that the man who had apparently vanished into the air wore a cloak the wind did not touch? With a worried frown, he peered into the woods around them. It looked different than it ever had before. Almost since he was old enough to walk, he had run loose in the forest. The ponds and streams of the waterwood beyond the last farms east of Eamon's field were where he had learned to swim. He had explored into the sand hills, which many in the two rivers said was bad luck, and once he had even gone to the very foot of the mountains of mist, him and his closest friends, Matt Cawthon and Perrin Ibarra. That was a lot further afield than most people in Eamon's ever went. To them, a journey to the next village, up to the Watch Hill or down to Devon Ride, was a big event. Nowhere in all of that had he found a place that made him afraid. Today, though, the Westwood was not the place he remembered. A man who could disappear so suddenly could reappear just as suddenly, maybe even right beside them. "No, Father, there's no need." When Tam stopped in surprise, Rand covered his flush by tugging at the hood of his cloak. "You're probably right. No point looking for what isn't there. Not when we can use the time getting on to the village and out of this wind." "I could do with a pipe," Tam said, "and a mug of ale where it's warm." Abruptly he gave a broad grin. "And I expect that you're eager to see Egwin." Rand managed a weak smile. Of all things he might want to think about right then, the mayor's daughter was far down the list. He did not need any more confusion. For the past year, she had been making him increasingly jittery whenever they were together. Worse, she did not even seem to be aware of it. No, he certainly did not want to add Egwin to his thoughts. He was hoping his father had not noticed he was afraid when Tam said, "Remember the flame, lad, and the void." It was an odd thing Tam had taught him. Concentrate on a single flame and feed all your passions into it. Fear, hate, anger, until your mind became empty. "Become one with the void," Tam said, "and you could do anything." Nobody else in Eamon's Field talked that way. But Tam won the archery competition at Beltane every year with his flame and his void. Rand thought he might have a chance at placing this year himself, if he could manage to hold on to the void. For Tam to bring it up now meant he had noticed, but he had said no more about it. Tam clucked Bella into motion once more, and they resumed their journey, the older man striding along as if nothing untoward had happened, and nothing untoward could. Rand wished he could imitate him. He tried forming the emptiness in his mind, but it kept slipping away into images of the black-cloaked horseman. He wanted to believe that Tam was right, that the rider had just been his imagination, but he could remember that feeling of hatred too well. There had been someone, and that someone had meant him harm. He did not stop looking back until the high-peaked, thatched roofs of Eamon's Field surrounded him. The village lay close in the westwood, the forest gradually thinning, until the last few trees stood actually among the stout framed houses. The land sloped gently down to the east, though not with patches of woods, farms, and hedge-bordered fields, of waterwood and its tangle of streams and ponds. The land to the west was just as fertile, and the pastures there lush in most years, but only a handful of farms could be found in the westwood. Even those few dwindled to none miles short of the sand hills, not to mention the mountains of mist which rose above the westwood treetops, distant but in plain sight from Eamon's Field. Some said the land was too rocky, as if there were not rocks everywhere in Two Rivers, and others said it was hard luck land. A few muttered that there was no point getting any closer to the mountains than need be. Whatever the reasons, only the hardiest men farmed in the westwood. Small children and dogs dodged around the cart in whooping swarms once it passed the first row of houses. Bella plodded on patiently, ignoring the yelling youngsters who tumbled under her nose, playing tag and rolling hoops. In the last months, there had been little play or laughter from the children. Even when the weather had slackened enough to let the children out, fear of wolves kept them in. It seemed the approach of Beltane had taught them how to play again. Festival had affected the adults as well. Broad shutters were thrown back, and in almost every house the good wife stood in a window, apron tied about her and long braided hair done up in a kerchief, shaking sheets or hanging mattresses over the window sills. Whether or not leaves had appeared on the trees, no woman would let Beltane come before her spring cleaning was done.